So for all of you who came here to listen a talk about semiotics, I must disappoint you, because actually this is not a talk about semiotics, in the sense that every time I introduce myself to some friends or to some colleagues, and then they ask me, okay, what do you do? I study semiotics. And what do you do by studying semiotics? Well, we study science and semiosis and science systems, and then they always claim that we are not somehow handling things as well. So my topic today is sort of going back to objects, to things, to what Augustine called res, so ontology mainly. Now, just to hook up with Tyler's presentation, I just wanted to remind that also for pairs, for instance, medieval thinkers such as Augustine or Abelard or Aquinas were quite important. As he pointed out, for instance, I was led to an admiring study of Locke, Berkeley, and Hume, and to that of Aristotle's Organon, Metaphysics, and the Psychological Treatises, and somewhat later derived the greatest advantage from the deeply pondering perusal of some of the works of medieval thinkers, Saint Augustine, for instance. So I basically came to the interest in the concept of ostension, since my topic of research is mainly based on the interpretation of Saint Augustine's work, and in one of his main treatises, which is called the Magistro, on the teacher, then there is this use of such a concept. Now, I will stick on the outline that you asked us to provide, and then try to outline a brief history of the concept. So first of all, if we take the etymological sense of the word, then ostension, in the verbal sense, it is mainly derived from the Latin ostendo, ostendere, which simply means showing or displaying or pointing to, or in other words, exhibiting something. The word is in its adjective form, so ostensive, has been used by several thinkers. Just to mention a few, Bacon, Leibniz, or Kant used ostensive in the adjective form. Well, obviously, for the one who are accustomed with mathematics, also ostensive take place in the distinction between geometric or ostensive mathematics and algebraic or symbolic mathematics. It's quite famous also the study of Russell, who talked about ostensive definitions. Benveniste also, the French linguist Benveniste, talked about ostension as elucidation of a term by means of showing. Quine likewise talked about ostension or direct ostension, and it is mainly claimed that the first definition of show, the first definition of show, comes from Plato, whom in the Cratylus described show as bringing before the sense of sight. And then back to Augustinus, Saint Augustine, who most probably was one of the first who put forward a theory of showing. Now, perhaps you are all familiar with this fictional island, right? And perhaps you remember that in a Swift mind there was this idea of a purely ostensive language. So if you remember the fictional book, there was this reform which basically forced the people of such an island to abolish all words whatsoever, So people were mainly forced to carry on their own backs a bundle of things in order to communicate. So this is like an extreme example of use of ostensive language in the case of Gulliver's Travel. Now, what about semiotics? Well, I found quite a lot of literature on the matter, so I guess that I made a selection of the most important authors, and I will try to go through them and then try to rise up some questions for discussion. Who do you think could be the first, one of the most famous semioticians? Well, obviously, Roman Jakobson. Well, as you know, I was a promoter of the semiotic thought. He was basically a man who read a lot and knew quite a few things. And he has several works. For instance, sorry, it's just it doesn't look very well because there is an overlapping. But anyway, language in relation to other communication systems, linguistics in relation to other sciences, for instance. Brain and language, and also his film In Decline. All these articles, there are mentioning of ostension or ostensive science. As you know, Roman Jakobson was trying to push or to encourage people in order to foster the development of semiotics. And for him, one of the main tasks was to sort of put forth criteria for the development of types of science. So he mentions a lot of possible criteria according to which science can be discerned. For instance, types of semiosis, or the relation between signians and signatum. So this basically refers to the distinction between index, icon, and symbols in Persian terms. Distinction according to sign perception, so according to the nature of what he calls signions, so sense of hearing, sense of touch, sense of smell. Accordingly, we have different types of signs. Structuration according to time and space, so spatial signs and temporal signs. Sign production as well. Sign ad hoc produce versus ostension, it's one of the criteria he listed as well. Pure and applied semiotic structures, homogeneous and syncretic formations, various relations between the addresser and the addressee, which simply means intra-communication, intercommunication, and pluricommunication. And then intentionality, the relation between the verbal pattern and all other types of signs. Now, what it is important for us is that he pointed out such a possible distinction between signs ad hoc produced versus ostension. Now, in a sort of diagrammatic way, we can divide signs according to sign production for Jakobson. So the first distinction he made is between signs produced ad hoc and then things used as signs, which he called ostension. And then the definition somehow that he gave is the following, and I quote: "The signs ad hoc produced by some part of the human body, either directly or through the medium of a special instrument, should be distinguished from a semiotic display of ready-made objects." So on the one hand, we have the production of signs through, let's say, body, so bodily organs, and then use of ready-made objects as signs. So the definition that he gave, Jakobson, about ostension can be like twofold. One is the use of things as signs simply, or a semiotic display of ready-made objects. And as an example, we can just take this one, the exhibition and compositional arrangement of synecdochic samples of shop goods in show windows. So simply, examples such this and this are, for Jakobson, examples of ostensions in which basically the ready-made object, which is displayed in a certain windows or shop, can give the idea of what is sold in that particular shop. Now, it is sort of interesting to make a sort of connection with the works of Yuri Mihailovich Lotman. He didn't have any theory of ostension, nor he talked about ostension as such. However, he distinguished two types of signs, at least in the book Semiotics of Cinema of 1973. And I point out this because the examples he provides are similar to the one given by Jakobson. So first of all, Yuri Lotman mentions that a sign is the materially expressed substitutes for objects, phenomena and concepts, which is used in the process of information exchange in a society. Consequently, the basic feature of the sign is its ability to realize the function of substitution. So, in the case of a conventional signs, such as words, the connection between expression and content is not motivated, and in the case of what he calls, at least in the English translation, pictorial or iconic signs, then these types of signs depends on upon a resemblance between signifier and signified, for example, in a picture. Now, let's take this example to discuss the two types of signs. When I arrived to Estonia, and then I was living in this area, I saw this kind of house with this kind of sign there. So, according to the distinction of conventional and iconic, that would be, in the Estonian language, basically a conventional sign, and according to this distinction made by Yuri Mihailovich, then it seems that there should be a prior knowledge of language in order to understand or to read what that kind of sign means. But if we take an example such as these, or these exactly, so cases of ostensive exposition of gods, basically, then according to this distinction, an iconic sign doesn't need any a priori code in order to decipher what's in there. And well, it is a simplification. Obviously, we all know that an iconic sign needs a symbolic ground in order to be understood. However, it is also interesting to note that one way of distinguishing conventional signs and pictorial or iconic signs is that conventional signs can be used for telling, says Lotman, whereas pictorial signs are used for naming. So they have a much more easy way, let's say, more easy, the way according to which they can be grasped is more natural, so to say. And also, same book by Lotman, it is said that when dealing with people speaking a language which we do not understand, we resort to iconic signs and illustrations. What I found interesting is that now the second person who talked about ostension is Umberto Eco, and if you take Umberto Eco's Trattato di Semiotica Generale, he exactly has the same example. I quote from Umberto Eco's theory of semiotics. Ostension represents the most elementary act of active signification, and it is the one used in the first instance by two people who do not share the same language. So same example discussed by Lotman there in discussion to the iconic signs. Sometimes the object is connected to the pointer, at others it is regularly picked up and shown. In both cases the object is disregarded as a token and becomes instead of the immediate possible referent of a mention, the expression of a more general content. So the definition of ostension that he provides is the following. Ostension occurs when a given object or event produced by nature or human action, intentionally or unintentionally, and existing in a world of facts as a fact among facts, is picked up by someone and shown as the expression of the class of which it is a member. Eco goes further and tries to establish at least some basic typologies between the types of ostensions, and then the one who is singled out by Lotman is what he calls an example. So an example would be when an object is selected as a whole to express its class, simply. So the mechanism governing the choice and the signifying correlation are based on a synecdoche of the kind members of its class. And this is one case. The second case is the sample. So only a part of an object is selected in order to express the entire object and thereby its class. So the mechanism governing the choice and the signifying correlation are based on the mechanism of part for the whole, so pars pro toto. What it is interesting to point out is that in Eco's theory of semiotics, ostensive signs have to be homeomaterial, which means they have to possess the same property of the object to which they refer to. So in the case of a sample, for instance, if I take as a sample a piece of cotton in order to signify my jacket, then these have to be of the same material, so they are homomaterial. And now if you go back to the examples showed before, the icon of an ice cream is not homomaterial, so in the case of the icon there is based on a resemblance, whereas in the ham hanging in a certain shop, then there is the case of homeomateriality. So this is the table, so the topology of modes of sign production that was provided by Eco, and as you can see, there is a place for ostension, and he points out these types of ostensions, and there is also the idea of being homeomaterial. Now the third semiotician, so to speak, is a Czech guy, and he's called Ivo Osolsobě. Now Ivo Osolsobě is a scholar that has a very strange relationship with semiotics, in as much as he worked as a theater scholar. So he was basically approaching semiotics from the angle of theater studies. He worked at the University of Brno, and he got in touch with Roman Jakobson. In fact, the typology between signs produced ad hoc and signs produced by ostension are basically referenced to the works of Ivo Osolsobě. Now here there are some of his books in Czech, if you want to take a look. So he has several publications on the matter of ostension. Some are available in English as well. And his idea is that what he is trying to develop is a sort of anti-semiotics, in as much as he's not concerned with signs, but is concerned with communication through objects, as I will try to explain. So the definition of ostension that he provides is the following. So according to Osolsobě, ostension can be defined as the giving of something to the cognitive disposal of somebody. Ostension, obviously, it is considered not only as a limit case of communication, but also as a limited one, inasmuch as the idea of communicating through things is just limited to objects, so to concreta that are present here and now, and then can be exhibited to someone else. He talks about the theory of ostension, in fact, as a theory of non-science, quite provokingly, for people, like I said in my introduction, that are obsessed, let's say, with the study of science. And in fact, he talks about theory of ostension as conceived as a theory of non-science. So according to his point of view, his theory as a sort of pre-semiotic character or anti-semiotic character. He claims that if we accept the semiotic claim that whatever takes part in the process of communication becomes eo ipso a sign, the concept of sign deteriorates into a totality of into a totally useless concept. And then he claims that ostension is a form of human cooperation, and human cooperation is unconceivable without language, without signs. However, in case of ostension, all this cooperation in signs and with signs results only in framing and securing of such a communication act in which the proper transfer of information proceeds without signs. Now, in order to understand quickly his point of view, he claims that theory of signs and theory of models can be thought in tandem. What does it mean, this one? He mainly singles out two types of communication. One is what he calls ostensive. And in this case of ostensive communication, the original, what he calls an original object, is shown, so it is present here and now. In the case of a non-ostensive situation, or what he calls a representative situation, then the original is not present. He points out different types of epistemic situation. Now, the first one is what he calls the case of direct experience, in which basically an original, now he used this word original, which it is quite unfortunate, but gives the idea of an object in presentia, which is basically at the cognitive disposal of a certain receiver. Obviously, there can be the case in which a certain original is at the disposal of different coexisting receivers, so more than one. Now, he claims that this, let's say, ideal situation in which someone is at the let's say, in conjunction with the object, then could be framed in the sense that not always we have at our disposal any original, but sometimes we have only particles of it, so only traces of it. So this would be the case of the situation of the partially present original for him. And then there would be the case in which there is no original at all. There are no objects at disposal. So what to do in that case? He claims that the situation could be sorted out by creating a model. So this is what he calls the situation of modeling. So in the situation of modeling the original, it is not present, what he calls an original object, and the object is basically substituted through the creation of a model. So the initial situation of, let's say, unsatisfaction is basically fixed with the records of a model. And quite interestingly, its definition of model is the one of a cognitive surrogate, which means that the information which is not provided through the original, it can be provided through a non-original, which equals a model. So, following this logic, he singles out two types of communication. One would be ostensive communication, in which someone transfers to someone else an object which is the original, and then the communication through model, in which there is an exchange of non-originals, as you can see here. Now, in the first case, he claims that communication through an original is, in fact, showing. It is presenting, so it is ostension. So it is a communication about the thing through the thing itself. The communication of the message is provided by the original itself. Finally, he sort of proposes in a sort of synoptical way the four types of epistemic situation, as you can see in this table. So the situation of what he calls the present original is mainly a situation of direct experience, in which, like we pointed out before, there is an interaction between an original and a receiver. Then there would be the situation of the modeling, in which there is a substitution of the original with the creation of a given model. Then the third case of epistemic situation would be the presentation by an original. And that would entail the interaction between the receiver, the sender, and the original, and then the communication by a model, which is the interaction between receiver, sender, and model. This sounds quite idiosyncratic, I would say. It's the first time that I come across sort of conception of modeling thought of as substituting something real. Needless to say, the idea of original in terms of Osolsobě's proposal is very problematic, because it sort of gives the idea that originals possess a sort of authenticity, that originals have more values than signs, which is a claim quite untenable, I would say. Now, concluding, I will just quickly try to say a few words about Saint Augustine and his work, the Magistro, of which I think you are accustomed already. So this is the dialogue in which Saint Augustine talks with his son Adeodatus, and it is basically a disquisition about teaching, about learning, about language, and whether it is possible to acquire knowledge through science, or whether it is also possible to acquire knowledge through non-science, so through things. So Saint Augustine introduces the problem of ostensive definition in the following quote. He claims, "If I were to ask what is signified when the three syllables paries, which is a wall, are spoken, surely you would be able to indicate it with your finger, so that while you were showing me, and yet not using any words, I could immediately see the thing itself, of which this three-syllable word is the sign." So the idea here is mainly the idea of ostensive definition, in the sense that if something cannot be explained or grasped by words, then I can simply pointing at something. So in this case, the example is the example of the paries, so wall. So we have the idea of pointing in its full semiotic nature. So the object which is signified is of course a particular physical object, so namely the wall, which can be seen, and the ostension involves pointing at that particular definiendum. It seems to me that this definition, or given by Augustine, could be seen as quite close to the one that was provided by Quine. And Quine pointed out that direct ostension is what follows, and I quote, "First, let me define direct ostension. The ostended point, as I shall call it, is the point where the line of the pointing finger first meets an opaque surface. What characterizes direct ostension, then, is that the term which is being ostensively explained is true of something that contains the ostended point." So, when basically we answer the question what this means by simple pointing, we are simply using the pointing finger in order to explain basically what a word stands for. And this is similar to what Quine called ostensive, direct ostension, but there are obviously some problems with this sort of definition. First of all, the idea of physical objects. So the example of Paris, so of the wall, raises the problem that ostension appears only to be applicable to, for physical objects which are present here and now. The exception that is made in Augustine is that all visible entities can be ostensibly defined, but not all corporeal things. So properties such as heat and weight and things such as sound and smell, although corporeal, they cannot be defined by pointing, for instance. Then there is the problem of specificity. So if I point my finger to a given wall, what do I mean by that? So do I mean that particular wall, or do I mean the generic term? So do I mean the classes of that wall? So these are all open problems in this definition of ostension. And furthermore, the pointing, as it is defined here, is not the wall itself, but it is the sign of pointing. So we are back to the original question, which was whether it is possible to signify without signs at all. So as pointing is a sign, it raises the issue whether anything can be shown without signs. Pointing is not a direct link with the object because it functions by means of a rule. Finally, I'd like to point out this distinction, still in Augustine, between an indirect ostension and a direct ostension. So in this case, an indirect ostension would be simply signs such as words or pointing, or any sort of signs could fall in this category. Whereas direct ostension, in Augustinian terms, would simply be demonstration. That is to say, when someone performs certain things in order to explain it. So this category is explained only by means of action. So direct ostension is that through which something is shown directly in itself, with no intermediary signs by which something other than the sign comes to the attention. And the example provided by Augustine is the following. What if I were to ask you